Okay, so for question number 1, trying to make sure I hold this just right because I'm recording and I don't want to. Okay. All right, so question number 1, completing the squares. You should have the steps on how to do that. So what is our first step? Move C. So that means I have to add that 9 to the other side. This is the only method that you don't start by setting it equal to 0. Factoring, it needs to equal 0. Quadratic formula needs to equal 0. Completing the square, totally different method. Step number 2 is to factor out this term from A and B. All right, so because there's a 4 here, I can't just divide this by 2 and square it. I need to factor out that 4. So you're dividing both of these by 4. When you divide both of these by 4, you get x squared. Well, I dropped the x, sorry. When you divide both of those by 4, you get x squared minus 4x. Okay, so let me pause right there. Any questions about what I did up until this point? Because this probably may be the last time I go through these steps with you before your test. Next, take this number right here, divide it by 2 and square it. So you need to take that -4, divide that by 2, and square it. And what do you get when you take -4 divided by 2 squared? +4. So you're adding that 4 here, but on the other side, what are you adding? 4 times 4. Because you had to factor out this 4, everything in this parentheses is multiplied by 4. So I'm really adding a 16. So I'm really adding 4 times 4. All right. So now let's factor this down. Two numbers that multiply to be 4 and add to -4. Yes.
Okay. So we need the -4 divided by 2 squared.
The b over 2 squared.
Okay. That's when we get 4.
Exactly.
And then we put it back in because
You have to keep an equation balance. So whatever I do on the left, I have to do on the right. So if I'm adding a 4 here, and an equation is like a scale, you probably have seen that analogy when you first started learning how to solve. Whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other side. So this factors down to x minus 2, x minus 2. And that equals 9 plus 16, which is 25. In math, we don't write things twice. We just say it is squared. So we have 4 times x minus 2 squared equals 25. Now we have to eliminate the 4 in front of the parentheses. So I'm going to divide by 4. So that cancels out. So I have x minus 2 squared equals 25 over 4. Take the square root. And this fraction has 2 perfect squares, so that's pretty easy to take the square root of because 25 and 4 are both perfect squares. So x minus 2 equals plus and minus 5 over 2. Now this is a perfect square, so we can actually finish this out. So I'm going to add the 2 to both sides. So this -2, I'm moving over. I'm adding it because I'm solving for x. So x equals +2 plus 5 over 2 Put that in your calculator, see what you get. And then x also equals positive 2 minus 5 over 2. And because it's an actual number, you can give me a number. So it's 2 plus 2.5 and 2 minus 2.5, because 5 over 2 is 2.5. Answers as you could say 9 over 2, or you could write it as 4.5. And for the second one, 2 minus 2.5 is either going to be negative 0.5 or negative 1/2. I mean, you know, either of those are correct. All right, so that would be what you would have to do on the test. Yes. So if you couldn't square root it, so for example, if you got something, I'm just going to make up something. So if you had something like, I'll just write up at the top. So let's say we had x minus 2 squared equals the square root, and you had like a 21. So you would just have, so if you had like x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 21. So I don't want a decimal. I mean, you could change it to a decimal, but I don't want decimals. So all you would do is just add the 2 to both sides, and you would just write it as x equals positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 21. So you look at the whole fraction. If you don't have 2 perfect squares, then you just leave it under the square root. If you can't do the whole thing, then we leave it alone. And we'll do more like that too. I'll try to fit. Okay, I got to go to Josh, and then I got to go to the next example. I'm sorry. Yes.
How did you get the x minus 2?
2 numbers that multiply to 4 and add to negative 4 is negative 2 times negative 2. All right, so let's look at the next example. We have to factor. I am saying after today, by the way. So we have to factor. So we have 6x squared minus 7x minus 5 equals 0. We need to make our box. Yes. So I had to set it equal to 0, so I had to subtract 5 from both sides. So 6x squared goes here, negative 5 goes here. At the top of the x is a times c, which will be negative 30. At the bottom is negative 7. So a times c goes at the top, b goes at the bottom. Find 2 numbers that multiply to be negative 30 and add to negative 7. Negative 10 and 3. So negative 10x and 3x. And then you take out your GCFs. So what is my greatest common factor in this top row? 2 what? 2x. What's my GCF in the bottom row? Not a 3, just a 1. That's all the bottom row. It's just a 1. And am I taking out a positive 1 or a negative 1? Positive, because it always takes the sign of what is closest to. Now let's look at our columns. Let's look at this first column. What would be my GCF? 3x, good. And my second column, what would be my GCF? So we're solving. So take both of those. So your answer should be 2 fractions. I prefer fractions over decimals, as I stated on the first week of school. And I think when you go to college, your professor will also, because the fraction is more accurate. So if you get 5/3, just get in the habit of just saying 5/3 and not 1.6 repeat. Okay, just 5 over 3, negative 1/2, done. Those are your 2 solutions. So x equals, you subtract the 1, divide by 2. So that would be negative 1 over 2. And also x equals, add the 5, divide by 3, positive 5 over 3. So for the quadratic formula, let Let me go ahead and write it on the top of the screen just in case you don't know it. It's opposite of b plus or minus the square root of. What's underneath the square root is your discriminant. And that's all divided by 2 times a.
Will you give us this formula on the test?
That is a really good question. I'll let you know tomorrow because that is on my list of things to do is to look at your test from this for Friday. I have not looked at it. But you should probably know that though. But I'm going to guess. I don't know. I don't want to tell you something to be wrong. All right, let's start off. Is this already set equal to 0? Yes. All right. So that means A is what? What's A? 2. What's B? What's C? All right. Be careful when you type this in your calculator. I always start with the discriminant, which is what I have written in red. So if you type this in your calculator like this, you will get the wrong answer and miss half of the points on the test. What is wrong with the way I wrote that? You need to put parentheses whenever you square a negative. If you don't do it, your calculator doesn't understand that that 3 is negative. Okay? So type it in your calculator with the parentheses surrounding the negative. Go ahead and type that in. That's fine. That's fine. You can do it that way. So I know I do the quadratic formula different. I always start with the discriminant. But if you want to just put everything in and go from there, that's fine too.
Start with the B.
It's the opposite of B, so if it's negative, it will change to a positive. I'll get there in a second because I'm not sure I understand your question. Sorry. Yes.
So you said put in your calculator. So do you care on the test if you don't show?
No, yeah, you don't have to show your work. So what's that? 9 minus 64? 54? 55. 55? Is that what it is? I don't have a calculator. Who got 55? Because I want to make sure we good. Okay, so 55. So that's what's underneath the square root. Can we simplify 55? Is there a perfect square that will divide into 55? Yes. You got negative 55? Okay. So when it's negative, we always take out the negative 1. Okay. Is there a perfect square that goes into 55? So we can't divide it by 4, 9, 16. So it's just going to say 55. So that's actually really easy. What is the square root of negative 1? I. So my discriminant would just be I root 55. And then, so this part here, let me write that in red. This is my simplified discriminant. So in front of it, now I'm just going to put the rest. And that's what I was trying to explain. That's why I said I would just explain it at the end of the question. That way if you still have a question, I can answer it. So now this part here represents this. So now I'm just going to put the plus or minus in front. Plus or minus goes in front. Then it's the opposite of B. And because B is negative, the opposite would be a positive 3. That's all over 2 times A. And A is 2. So what is 2 times 2? 4. This is my final answer. There is nothing else I can do with that. So this is inequalities, right? You remember seeing this back in the day, Algebra 1. This is nothing deep. Solving inequalities, but we have to write our answer in interval notation. So go ahead and copy down example 1 or question 1 and 2, and then we'll work through them together. So what would I do to solve this first inequality? How do you get rid of this negative 7? Add 7. Let's go ahead and do that. Add 7 to both sides. And then what do you have to do to solve for x? Divide by 3. So you get x is greater than 3. So on the number line, we would have an open circle on the 3, and it's greater than, so it will go to the right. So how would I write this in interval notation? Parentheses. So my smallest number is what? 3. And it's going towards what number? Infinity. Infinity always gets a parentheses. On your test, this is the only way I accept the answer. All of your answers in pre-calc should be written in interval notation to get full credit. So that would be how I would want you to write that. Go ahead and start solving number 2. Number 2 is a little bit more complicated because we got to distribute a negative and combine like terms and stuff. So when you distribute the negative 5, you should have 8 minus 10 minus 5x is less than and equal to negative 2x. We combine our like terms. And when you add these together, 8 minus 10 is negative 2. And now we're going to add 5x to both sides. So negative 2 is less than or equal to 3x. And then we divide by 3, so we get a fraction. Now, you only flip the sign when you divide by what? When do you flip it? When you divide both sides by a negative. So, I'm going to go to the top of the screen. So, we end up with negative 2/3 is less than or equal to x. And when you have an inequality, you always want to have that x on the left. So it could be a true inequality. So I'm just going to rewrite it and flip everything. So I'm going to flip. And then I'm going to move that this way. It's the same thing. To say negative 2/3 is less than or equal to x is the same thing as saying x is greater than or equal to negative 2/3. Except now you can write this in interval notation. And because it is greater than, that means we're starting at negative 2/3. Negative 2/3 gets a bracket though because it's equal to, and it's going towards infinity. Infinity always has parentheses. Yes. Did you still get negative 2/3? Yeah. Yeah. So the good thing about math is there's like so many different ways to do each question. And when I grade your test, I look for the answer. If I see the right answer, I move on. And I don't really look at how you did it because there's so many different ways to do a question. And it's only, but if you don't get it, then I have to look to see where you made your mistake and figure out how many partial points to give you. But if you have x is greater than or equal to negative 2/3 as your answer, and then you have what I have in that yellow box, then that is full credit. Yes.
So you wouldn't grab that with number line?
Solve and write your, no, we don't have to. I mean, we could, and I'll do it because I don't know if we have to on the test. And when you have to do it in your homework, I just want you to put one number. So I would just put negative 2/3. Here, I'll put it on there. So negative 2/3 here. And then because it's equal to, you would have a closed circle. And it's greater than, so it goes to the right. So that would be the graph. Just a basic graph, nothing too complicated, hard, or anything like that. All right, we're actually almost done. We got 2 more questions and we'll be finished. Go ahead and copy down 3 and 4. Yeah, so if it's equal to underneath, that means you graph it with a closed circle and it has a bracket. Algebra 2 is learning how to do that, or they learned it last week, so those notes are still up there. So bracket, if it's equal to, parentheses if it's not. Who had that for number 3? X is greater than or equal to 2. All right, good. Go ahead and do number 4, last one. So this is the first one that we've had to divide by a negative. So remember to flip your sign. So you should have got x is greater than or equal to -1. Yes. Right. Because we had to divide by negative, so you see how that was a less than sign? So I had to flip it and make it greater than. So if you divide by a negative, divide or multiply by a negative, you have to flip the sign. Yes.
Will we be doing anything with parabolas and what?
We'll be doing anything with parabolas.
Yeah.
We are going to graph, yes. That's why at the beginning of this first day of school, I said you need graph paper. So graphing, we start that when we hit chapter 1, which I think is the end of this week. So you need to have graph paper. I think somebody had a hand up over here. Maybe not. All right, just a reminder about homework. All of this information can be found on Canvas. Now, I was pretty loosey-goosey for the first one but it's really important that anything you turn into that blue tray has your full name, because I don't know your last names and I have to figure out. That just slows me up. Everything you turn in, every single homework assignment, I need your first and last name. I need you to write first period and the homework number. Homework 2 is due tomorrow. Those are the numbers. That is A7, and what we just finished today, which is A9, that is due Friday. And this information can be found on Canvas.